Welcome to Mike's Retro Curiosities, where we explore the wonderful world of retro games. Today we're taking a look at the original Metal Gear. Metal Gear was originally released in 1987 for the MSX2 computer and then later ported over to the NES the same year. While I will be discussing version differences later, I'll be primarily referring to the original MSX version, which I played as a part of the Metal Gear Solid Legacy collection on PS3. One interesting bit of trivia about the original Metal Gear is that its cover image, which you can see here, was actually stolen. This picture is actually based off of a picture of Kyle Reese from the original Terminator. It was actually fairly common at the time for Konami to rip off artwork from other media, so this probably won't be the last time I mention it. Metal Gear was created by Konami and marked the directorial debut of Hideo Kojima. Kojima was asked by his superiors to make an action game for the MSX2, however he ran into a number of technical hurdles, most notably the fact that the MSX2 could only handle so many sprites per horizontal scan line. This would have been a big issue for an action game, as the player is one sprite, any enemy is another sprite, and each individual bullet is its own sprite as well, so odds are the horizontal limit would have been filled up very quickly. While there are techniques to work around this technical limitation, most notably through the use of sprite flicker, Kojima found it easier to simply create a game that disincentivized action. He, in effect, created a sneaking game that incentivized players to find ways to go around enemies without confronting them directly. Metal Gear was not the first stealth game, as it was predated by Castle Wolfenstein on the Apple II, though as far as I know, I don't think that this game was at all influenced by the earlier title. This might be a case of convergent evolution. Nonetheless, this game did do a great deal in helping to popularize the genre. Players take on the role of Special Agent Solid Snake in his video game debut, as he is tasked with infiltrating the facilities of a mercenary group called Outer Heaven. Outer Heaven has recently gained control of a nuclear missile-equipped bipedal walking tank called Metal Gear, which you can see here. And they have taken a number of people prisoner, including the brilliant Dr. Petrovich Magnar. Despite the series later gaining a reputation for convoluted stories, this first game is actually fairly basic, although it does contain a pretty big plot twist near the end that I'm not going to spoil. Players explore 3 large buildings as they search for various items and hostages to rescue. This is very much an early example of an action-adventure game. Players have to explore, collect keycards to open doors, as well as find various gadgets to aid in exploration. In a way, it plays almost like a Metroidvania, with the player initially constrained in terms of where they can go, and with each item expanding the game world more and more. Not all items are necessary for progression, with a large number of them being used for combat or aiding in stealth. Most notably, this game introduced the series' staple cardboard box, which players could duck under to hide from the view of guards. The main character can even use the smoke from cigarettes to uncover laser tripwires. There's also a variety of guns, rocket launchers, body armor, rations that you can use to regain health, and a lot more. Players can even find and rescue hostages to increase their item carrying capacity. Overall, the core gameplay loop is extremely solid, but levels can become somewhat overly labyrinthine. Figuring out the way forward at times can be somewhat obtuse. Though admittedly, by the standards of action-adventure games from this time, it's really not that bad. You can generally figure out where you need to go most of the time without too much trouble. I very highly recommend drawing out a map on graph paper as you explore. Thankfully, this is made a lot easier by the fact that the MSX lacked scrolling capabilities, and thus the game goes from screen to screen, kind of like The Legend of Zelda, meaning that the entire game is laid out on a grid. Trust me when I say that doing this will save you a lot of time on backtracking every time you find a new item or key. In my playthrough, it always seemed like every time I got a new key card, I would always forget which doors hadn't been opened yet, and thus I would spend an absurd amount of time just going back through areas I had already been through just to see what new doors I could unlock. Creating a map simplifies that process significantly. Stealth in this game is fairly rudimentary. Guards have a direct line of sight with no peripheral vision and are alerted to nearby sounds. In a way, it feels almost arcadey, though it is still very challenging and definitely feels very satisfying when you can get around enemies without being seen. Graphically, the game looks solid for its time, if a bit drab due to its military theming. The one thing I think deserves more love with this game is its soundtrack. It may not be Harry Gregson Williams, but it still manages to produce a number of quite excellent 8-bit chiptunes in my opinion. Overall, I think that the original Metal Gear is a really good title. It's a bit rough around the edges to be sure, but much less so than a lot of other non-linear adventure games from this period. As far as version differences are concerned, the MSX wins hands down. The NES version introduced a new outdoor area at the beginning that frankly wasn't very good. It introduced new bugs, and overall just didn't play as well as the original. Also, due to the NES's limited color palette, it definitely looks a lot worse as well. That isn't to say that Metal Gear on the NES is bad. If this was all you had back in 1987, and for most North Americans this was the only version that they had access to, then it was perfectly acceptable. But now that we live in the future and do have access to the MSX original, it's definitely the version I prefer. The original Metal Gear would end up having a long and far-reaching legacy. The NES version would get a sequel called Snake's Revenge. This, in turn, would help spur Kojima to create an entirely different sequel on the MSX called Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake. The series would then really hit it big with its third entry and leap into 3D with Metal Gear Solid on the PlayStation 1. Today, Metal Gear is one of the most beloved and important gaming franchises of all time, and Solid Snake is one of the most iconic characters in the medium. And it all started with this original game from 1987, born out of technical constraints. But that will be it for today. Please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe. This video is sponsored by M&M Games, and I will see you guys next time.